Geopolitics and a grueling years-long bear market are pushing biopharmas from Beijing to Boston to rethink their strategies. The BioSecure Act in the US Congress and a capital markets crunch heard around the world have boards thinking of plans B and C and C-suites finding alternative ways to finance their most promising assets. Welcome to a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. I'm Jeff Cranmer, an executive editor here at BioCentury, and today we are previewing the BioCentury-BayHelix China Healthcare Summit. It's scheduled for October 30th through November 1st at the St. Regis in Shanghai. Note that Halloween, at least for North Americans, falls on those dates, which is probably appropriate for the tensions we're dealing with. There's a little stress out there, but it's a good thing because I have joining me to set the stage for the event, Wendy Pan, chairman of BayHelix, who is a partner at Goodwin, and Franck, senior partner and co-leader of McKinsey's Asia Life Sciences practice. BioCentury-BayHelix and McKinsey have had a collaboration for more than a decade based on our mutual interest in fostering cross-border innovation across the Pacific. From the BioCentury side, I'm pleased to say our co-founder, president and CEO David Flores is joining us, and Josh Berlin, BioCentury's head of BD. He heads up our conferences. Now, this is the 11th time we are hosting this event, and it comes as politicians in Washington are raising the pressure. Companies are still struggling to raise money, even as we're starting to see green shoots of a recovery. So I'd like to bring in David now. David, you're heading to Shanghai, as am I and Josh. We've got this big event. Why is this event so important at this crossroads, if you will?
It's interesting that you mentioned crossroads. I think when we started this 10 years ago, we set out to do something that I attribute to Franck at McKinsey. We decided we would chronicle how China would build a bridge to innovation. And frankly, 10 years ago, I don't think any of us had any clue or could make any predictions about where that would go. And so it has been 10 years, but I think everyone would agree that the speed at which this transformation took place was really startling. And now here we are starting into the second decade. And I think what we're looking for now is how fast Chinese entrepreneurs and investors and their global partners can adapt to today's geopolitical landscape. And will they do so with the same speed that they created the first transformation? So that's what I'm looking for. For the rest of you, Jeff and his team have been creating a timeline of decisions made by Chinese stakeholders over the past 2 years. And we're going to discuss that at the meeting because it's really interesting. You can't necessarily say that there's a pattern. There's a lot of, dots on a timeline. And the question is, can we see things that are going to be sustainable in terms of this transformation or change in business strategies that Jeff talked about?
Wendy, BayHelix. Of course, for those who don't know, BayHelix is the nonprofit organization connecting cross-border life sciences business leaders in China, elsewhere in Asia, and the US. Wendy, you were named chair, I think, last year, and your other hat, you see a lot of deal flow in your position at Goodwin. I'm curious, as you step into this year's China Summit, why is it important for BayHelix?
Actually, it's a very exciting time. David just mentioned, the geopolitical tension and risks. In Chinese, there's a word called 危机, and it means risks and also presents opportunities. And I would say this is exactly what's happening now. I wear two hats. One hat is as a chairwoman of BayHelix. I'm also the chair of Goodwin's Life Sciences practice in Asia. And it's an exciting year for me because there were a lot of deals. Last year, a year of licensing and partnership transactions. This year is a year of M&A transactions, new co-formations, joint ventures. Especially BayHelix members played such an important role in many of these transactions. For example, earlier this year, Gracell was acquired by AstraZeneca, Proteologics was acquired by J&J, Curon was acquired by Merck. Gracell's founder, William Cao, he is a longtime BayHelix member, and Proteologics CEO and founder, David Shen, he is also a longtime BayHelix member. And Gracell, Proteologics, Curon, and Profound, these companies also have the founding investors or important investors who are BayHelix members. This is truly a good year for many BayHelix members from transactional side. In fact, the BayHelix board, when we recommend, decide on the BayHelix BioCentury Company of the Year award, we had a tough time. You will see how we creatively solve the problem.
Yeah, there was quite a few big deals, as you said, Wendy, and I can imagine it tied you in knots to figure out who might win the transaction of the year, who might win woman of the year. There were so many compelling storylines in the past year that I can't wait to get together with everyone to talk about over cocktails, tea, and xiaolongbao, as that's how I roll when I'm at a conference. But Franck, I got to bring in Franck because Franck partners with BioCentury for many of our conferences, our new Grand Round Summit, our first real R&D summit that we've done. Of course, our bioequity that's coming up in May. That'll be in Belgium, the home of Kevin De Bruyne, as I like to talk to Belgian VCs about, as it seems to calm their nerves if they get that respect of having a world-class footballer. And of course, the East-West Summit that's coming up in March in Singapore. Franck and his team do brilliant reports for all of these conferences that we release to our attendees first. So Franck, why don't you maybe give us a little bit of a teaser on what your team is going to present in Shanghai?
Well, first, thank you, Dave, Josh, and Jeff, and good to see you again, Wendy. It's great to be back. Hard to believe that this is actually the start of a second decade of collaboration between McKinsey and BioCentury, and I'm very happy to say that our relationship has grown over the years with collaboration on multiple events now across the world, actually, right? As you just explained, Jeff. I think that for this year report for China, we wanted to step back a little bit, right? I think the last 2 to 3 years, our report has been very focused on the development of innovation in China, right? What's happening with Chinese biotech, the regulatory reform, what we see in the pipeline, and how that's going to change potentially, access to innovation, not just in China, but potentially around the world. This year, we wanted to go back as well to look at the actual attractiveness of a Chinese market for Chinese biotech, because that's also an important part of the story, but maybe even more importantly for global multinationals who have a significant presence in China, who are trying to grow their presence and have to contend with market conditions that on one hand are getting better, but on the other hand are still quite challenging, right? In the context of a slowing Chinese economy, but also some of the dynamics that we are all well aware of. So we cover in the report two topics. One is how attractive is the China market? And we look at that from a growth standpoint, but also from an investment and return standpoint, which is also critical, obviously. And then we also take stock of the additional progress, I would say, made by China innovation, right? And then Wendy, I think we'll talk about that topic more in terms of deal making and what we see in terms of quality of innovation coming out of China and some of the new trend like new corp being set up in the US to kind of find a way to bring innovation to the US market, right? But here maybe I will focus more on the other part of the report, which is China an attractive market, right, for multinationals? And on that point, I think we conclude that yes, it is an attractive market. However, it's not attractive for every company. And even for the ones who have the right portfolio and the right commitment to win in the market, a profound transformation of their go-to-market model and capabilities is required if they want to continue actually to do well in that market. And
so frankly, are you thinking that the domestics now will be a greater form of competition than maybe they have for the MNCs?
Sure. So, first we look at the growth rate of multinationals in China, and this is happening across sectors, not just in pharmaceuticals, right? I could say the same in medtech and in consumer and other sectors. The growth rate has slowed down in the last 3-4 years, right? And however, if you disaggregate that growth rate and look at what's happening under the hood, what we see is actually that mature brands, also off-patent originator drugs, actually are shrinking, right? Whereas innovative drugs launched by multinationals in the past, 5-7 years, or even more recently, are actually growing rapidly. We're talking about an expansion on average at 15-20%. This means that the innovation market, the on-patent innovation market of China, which is roughly worth $20 to $25 billion today, probably will reach $50 billion by 2030. This is Wendy?
May I say it's a good market for innovation drugs for big pharmas. At the same time, it's also a good market to bargain hunting for innovative assets.
Exactly. I think that's back to the principle that we talk to our clients about having an in China for China strategy and in China for global strategy. This topic has been there for 10 years or even 15 years, but it has really become real, I would say, in the last 2 to 3 years, in particular the in China for global part, where potentially companies can actually create more value from that in China for global than their in China for China. Because the in China for China strategy can be challenged. Yes, it's a big market. Again, 50 billion by 2030. That will make it the second or third largest innovation market in the world, right around where Japan is. And it will have massive upside still from there, right? Because the per capita innovation value will be still very small compared to developed markets. However, now there's access challenges, right? There's a lot of competition, as you alluded to, Dave. It's not just multinationals competing amongst each other. It's also local companies coming to market with better drugs that can be actually sourced from China for global, but are also a competition for multinational in the China market. It's also patent life that are currently too short, and there is some efforts made to extend patent life. It's also, quite frankly, an NRDL process that is challenging for companies in terms of budgetary constraints, and also a phase of NRDL landing, which is actually taking drugs to hospitals across China, that is still too slow and painful from an operational standpoint and constrains the peak sales value and ramp-up curve of new drugs launched in the Chinese market. So the overall value creation is constrained relative to what it could be, and there's, obviously hope that it will improve, but it is a situation we have today. Dave?
So I guess one of the questions I'd like to ask both of you, Wendy and Franck, is, there's this China for global has always been a goal. I'm wondering now in this sort of so-called decoupling environment, whether it's going to be a stimulus for making decisions that actually accelerate Chinese innovations to other markets, but maybe in the hands of others versus the hands of the Chinese originator. And we're seeing, that's the phrase we've been tossing around recently in our story conference is deconsolidation of Chinese companies, which is another, maybe a micro form of decoupling, right? You decouple yourself. Yeah. Do you see decoupling yourself as a route that's actually going to turn out to be completely practical?
I would say there used to be aspirations for maybe 1 or 2 Chinese pharma companies who want to become like a Takeda, to be a global player. But now, because of the geopolitical tension, I think pretty much everyone has put this aspiration aside. And the interesting part is, it did not stop the globalization of assets created in China. A very interesting example is a special M&A transaction involving Aeolus and GSK, right? The TSLP. That's a transaction which does not involve any Chinese party, but the asset was in-licensed by Aeolus from Henry. So essentially, it's the globalization of a China-created asset via the VC fund.
We've seen a few of these, right, Wendy? Like we saw Donnie McGrath of OrbiMed, found a couple of assets that he then put into China assets that he put into a U.S. entity.
Right.
And then we also saw Ken Song, of course, after selling his radiotherapy company. He has just like packaged together a couple of China assets, brought in the VCs and put it into a U.S. entity. We're seeing a lot of this from U.S. VCs. Are we going to start seeing this trend from China VCs as well, like finding China assets and packaging them in a U.S. or European entity, do you think?
Well, it's an interesting issue. First of all, in today's geopolitical environment, for someone to implement this strategy and execute either an IPO or M&A transaction, you want good connection with big farmers in the US. You know, the management team is like a recognized figure in the US market. So that probably will be a little bit challenging for Chinese VCs to do it by itself. But teaming up, you know, a Chinese VC teaming up with a US VC or several US VCs, I can see that could happen.
Yeah, I think this is first, I think a huge trend, and I think we have yet to understand fully the implication of what's going on here. I think first, what's happening, the genesis of it is that the Chinese market, even though it's becoming a large market for innovation, does not provide today enough rewards for innovators, right, for different reasons. Therefore, any Chinese company who has invested in innovation, even though it's done quite efficiently, still wants to recoup its investment. And the best way to recoup the investment is still to get access to the US market. I would not even call it globalization. It's really about getting into the US market, which is by far the biggest market for innovation in the world, I guess more than $400 billion, and has by far as well the highest profitability for any participant, right? So how do you get into the US market? That's what all Chinese companies and investors are trying to figure out. Clearly, there's limitation on what they can do directly, and therefore we're going to see more creative models emerge. And I think 2023, 24 is just the start of that wave. And absent of, I guess, disruptions, we should see much more of those type of deals coming up. The question to me is, how can US-based investors or European investors take advantage of this trend, right? And what would that do actually to the flow of innovation in the US market? And maybe what does that do to competitive dynamics even, right? When we think about new therapeutic classes and new drugs that are being launched in the US, I mean, do we then expect to see more me better or me too join the party very quickly in the US? I think that's a key question that could influence actually where this goes.
Well, thanks for that, Franck and Wendy. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to bring Josh into the conversation to tell you a little bit about the panels that will be addressing these topics at our 11th BayHelix BioCentury China Healthcare Summit.
From ADCs to bispecifics, deal-making between China and the West is accelerating. At the same time, the world is changing, requiring new strategies to succeed. This October, BioCentury-BayHelix and Insights partner McKinsey & Company invite you to Shanghai for the 11th China Healthcare Summit. Network, partner, and debate with industry peers and get a first-hand look at China's life sciences ecosystem. Register today at biocenturychinasummit.com. Can't visit Shanghai? Register instead for a digital pass.
We're back. I'd like to bring in Josh now, who heads up our conferences and has been working night and day to pull together this iteration of the China Healthcare Summit. Josh, we're going to have a lot of panels talking about just these subjects that Franck, Dave, and Wendy were digging into there. Can you highlight a few for us?
Yeah, happy to, Jeff. And several of the topics we've talked about on the podcast are going to be front and center in the program. So first off, we have over 60 industry key opinion leaders on the program this year, including Wendy, Franck, and Dave, including also several of the folks that are mentioned already on the podcast. So we'll have William Cal of Gracell, we'll have David Shen of Proteologics. They'll both be talking about their recent deals with AZ and J&J. So some really interesting opportunities there to talk about case studies and how those deals came about. We also will be showcasing two sessions that I think in particular touch on what Frank and Wendy have been speaking about. One is we have a VC showcase session this year. Jeff, I know you're moderating that session, but we're going to have several top Western VCs as well as some China VCs on that session talking about what they're doing in China, what they're looking for. I'm sure the newco strategy will be one major topic of discussion during that session. We also have a deal makers showcase session this year called What Does Pharma Want? And so we have several of the multinational pharmas on that panel, including Pfizer, including Novartis. Novartis just recently, just in the last week or so, had a big deal in China and is done several deals in China. So recently they did the deal with the Chengdu Baoyu, which I think was a $70 million upfront on an oncology small molecule. Also had a really big RNAi deal with Argo at the beginning of the year. So it'll be really interesting to hear from the pharmas as to what they're now looking for in China going into 2025. I think another panel, Frank was talking about, some of the challenges and opportunities for multinational pharma in China this year. So McKinsey is going to be chairing again our annual Pharma GM roundtable, we call it. So we have the heads of China from Sanofi and Pfizer, Novartis, J&J on that panel, along with Frank's colleague, Jin Wang. That'll certainly be one of the highlights. We have a capital market showcase session also, which will talk about some of the challenges that have really been having to be faced by a lot of first-time CEOs in China, as well as VCs with this extended downturn. And then I guess the other part I would like to highlight is that, I do think we have a really good presenting company track this year. Jeff, I know you and some of our colleagues spent a lot of time in assembling that track. So I think there's some really good companies on there that are going to tell their stories to potential partners and investors.
There really are, Josh. Hua Medicine, of course, the diabetes company. We'll have Jeremy Levin's Ovid, the neurology company, making its way to Shanghai. And they'll be joined by another 24 or so companies. We have a couple of slots left. If you're interested, reach out to me, reach out to Josh. You can find the information on our website. And what's the URL, Josh? You're better at this stuff than me.
It's BioCentury-ChinaSummit.com. So please check it out. It has the full agenda there, everything you need to know to register.
Excellent.
The other thing I should plug also, Wendy alluded to it earlier, but we always at the China Summit have the annual BayHelix Awards, a ceremony that Wendy will be emceeing. And so looking forward to seeing who are the winners this year.
It's like Muhammad Ali. It's like the Thrilla in Manila, the level of deals that have taken place. But hey, Dave has a really cool fireside chat that he's going to be doing this year. So I want Dave to tell us a little bit about that and how we think it's going to go.
Oh, you're talking about the old guys session? Is that?
Well, I have seen that advertisement.
Yes,
but,
it's Sam Waxel, who had a lot to say at last year's meeting about what innovation is and why you have to innovate in order to globalize and be globally relevant. And in this context, I guess, in the context of geopolitics, if you create innovation that no one can ignore, then geographies doesn't really matter. And he and Jeremy Levin and I have been like hanging out together, yakking about these things for like 30, 35 years. And Jeremy's going to be there. And I think that's very important because Jeremy can speak from an insider's point of view because he's just the recent chairman of Bio, and he's been witness to all the ways that the industry is responding to things like biosecure. And I think there's some really interesting ideas going to come out of this. The three of us are going to be talking about not so much, we go to the beginning of the meeting, you start talking about, well, what are the decisions people are making and are they practical or, are they sustainable? And I think what the three of us are going to talk about more is like try to challenge people to think about what decisions they should be making. And we'll see how it goes. It's unscripted, so we're just going to wing it, and I think it'll be great fun.
Excellent. Frank, I'm curious, any company or panel you're particularly interested in, or any idea that maybe you want to drill into in the hallways at this year's conference?
I think it'll be interesting to see what the mood is, I think, overall among participants in the ecosystem. I think I'm getting mixed signals, right? I think on one hand, I think people would say, yes, the market for innovative drugs in China is booming, it's growing very fast. Regulatory reform is still underway. We still see some improvements in access. On the other hand, obviously, there is also some concern about the state of the shape of the China economy and the transition to the new economy that the government is pushing. Is that happening fast enough? There's also concerns about the level of competitive intensity in the Chinese market and whether or not this allows companies to recoup their investments sufficiently, right? That's a real question. There's also a question around, support from headquarters to China operations, which is still real. But at the same time, we are no longer in the world of, let's say, 2015 or even 2020, where headquarters were happy to invest almost with no limit into the Chinese market, right? Because the growth rate was so high. Companies were growing at 25 to 40% a year. The sky was the limit. Now, clearly, there's still a lot of growth possible, but companies are also more rational about their investment decisions. And increasingly, China has to compete with other geographies around the world to receive the proper level of investment that the Chinese operations hope to get, right? So there's some dynamics like that I would love to better understand. I look forward to the panel that my colleague Jane will moderate with 4 of the leading global biopharma companies who all are, I think, in a different situation in China. So it'd be interesting to contrast their perspectives. And as always, we meet new people at that conference, and that's also part of the charm of it. You just don't know what's going to come to you and when new idea will come up from those conversations. So I look forward to that.
Excellent. How about you, Wendy? Is there any person that you're looking to buttonhole in the hallway, or is there a particular panel that you're excited to be on?
I would say this is just an exciting opportunity to meet people. My personal experience is I've been telling my VC friends in Boston, in San Francisco about opportunities, exciting assets from Chinese biotech companies. And, it did not really generate much action until a year ago. A slew of big pharma licensing transactions, including Novartis licensing Shanghai Argo, Merck licensing a bunch of ADC programs from Goodwin. These turned out to be great investments for the big pharmas, as well as Aeola's successful story to sell the assets bought from Henry to GSK. So this year you saw so many newco formations, and now VCs have jumped onto this bandwagon. So you see creative deal structures, interesting opportunities often came out of these meetings. So I would say it's just a fantastic opportunity to brainstorm and check out your potential partners.
Yeah, well said, Wendy. And I can't thank you and Franck enough for all you do to help make this conference happen. Look forward to seeing you next week. I will say, Josh and I kind of missed out on this initially last year, but the bar at the St. Regis Shanghai has this guy that does card tricks. And Josh and I were like, this is a little weird. But the last night we were relaxed, everything went well, and he blew our minds. So you never know what's going to happen.
Invite him up. Yeah, we can invite him up to the reception this year, maybe.
You never know what's going to happen at a BioCentury event.
If I could do one more plug, Jeff.
We
certainly hope everyone will join us in Shanghai next week. If for any reason you can't make it out to Shanghai, we do have a digital access pass for this event, which includes live streaming of all the panels and also includes 2 bonus days of virtual partnering. So again, hope everyone could join us in Shanghai, but if for whatever reason you can't, you can still get involved with the partnering and get involved with the content by getting a virtual pass.
Excellent. Well said, Josh. We'd love to have you there, though. So there's still time to register. BioCentury. What's the website again, Josh? You're so good at the URLs.
BioCentury-ChinaSummit.com, Jeff. This is why you're not on the marketing department.
It is why I am the podcast host. All right. Thanks, everyone. Dave, thanks for stepping out of your Nashville honky tonk that you like to hang in at on Tuesday nights to join us. And Frank, thanks to your team for the report. Wendy, we will see you next week as well. And Josh, I want to see a card trick from you. You're going to have to go toe to toe with that guy.
Absolutely. Safe travels, everyone.
All right. We will hopefully see you in Shanghai, or you'll be able to access this conference on our digital platform. You can head to BioCentury-ChinaSummit.com to register, learn more about the program. If you go, you'll be able to say hello to Frank, Dave, Josh, myself, and Wendy in person over some delicious dumplings. And there's also some great one-to-one meetings that take place. And my colleague Matt Krebs will be there if you have any questions about BioCentury's database. He's always happy to walk you through it. And next week, you'll have Stephen Hansen returning to host while I'm away. We'll have a regular pod released Monday night, San Francisco time. Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for BioCentury This Week. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education. We'll catch you next week. And thanks to our production guru, Cole Travis, for putting this all together.